We live in a culture, in a society, especially in the United States, that more is never enough. It's like we never can get enough things, enough stuff, and so we're constantly being bombarded on TV, on the radio, in magazines, newspapers, billboards, why the things we have are not good enough. Why we need to have better things than what we have. And so all the time we want to just get more and more and more. I heard someone say that the United States is the only country where on Thursday you talk about all the things that you're thankful for, and then on Friday you beat each other up to get a bunch of stuff that you don't need. Now, if you don't do the Black Friday thing and it's not that big of a deal to you, I want to read to you just some headlines that I found from Black Friday. These are actual news headlines. First one, at least 2 malls across America shut down after fights. Shots fired during Black Friday. Another one, employee pepper sprayed during shoplift attempt on Black Friday. All right, here's another one. Black Friday shoppers resort to punches at mall in Alabama. And the last one, Black Friday shopper robbed at gunpoint by teenagers. We got enough, and yet we're going to fight to get more stuff on Black Friday. Now, they didn't have Black Friday when my little sister was a little girl, but she wanted a Cabbage Patch doll. That's all that she wanted, and my grandmother decided she was going to get her one of those dolls. It was the first year that they were big. I wasn't with her. I just had to hear her story, but she said when she went to the store to get one of these dolls, that ladies were literally fighting each other, punching and smacking each other to get these dolls. And I'm thinking to myself, what in the world, are you kidding me? We do those kind of things just so we can have more stuff, more things. That's the society in which we live in. Knowing that we want more and more, we decided to do this series. Not to talk about more things that we want or more things that we may need, but talk about attributes that if we have those as a part of our lives, we're going to look more like Jesus. People are going to see Him more in our lives. So the first thing we talked about was more contentment. Where we just look at our lives and we realize we've got probably more than we need. And so we can just be content with what we have. But Paul said he had to learn the secret of contentment. He had to learn the fact that God will provide all of His needs. And so you and I have to get that in our minds, that God will provide everything that we need. Many times He'll provide us our wants. But we've got to learn to be content. And if the United States will learn to be content, Black Friday wouldn't happen. Okay, a lot of the credit card debt that we go into at Christmas would not happen if we simply would learn to be content. The week after that, Matt talked to us about more savings. That we should put some money behind or away for a rainy day in case there's some medical issues or the roof on the house needs to be fixed or your car isn't running. And so you don't have to go to credit card debt. You've got some that's over there that's ready for you. It's smart to save. That's what Proverbs tells us. But then there's something else along that, is if you save, if you've got money to spare, when people need help, you're going to have the opportunity to be able to share with other people. So savings, more savings, opens the door to more generosity, which is what we talked about last week. It's just being generous with the things that God has given to us. And we learned that generosity, it's not based on what's in your pocket, it's on what's in your heart. Paul told us that we should decide in our hearts what to give to God, not reluctantly or under compulsion, because God loves a what kind of giver? Cheerful giver. Man, we ought to be excited to be able to come and give money and to give back to God. That's the way our lives should be. Today, we're going to talk about more sacrifice. Jesus was at the temple with His disciples. They were sitting not in the temple, but outside, in an area where they would collect offerings. And in those days, there weren't offering plates. There were wooden boxes. And on top of the box, they would look like a trumpet, the end of a trumpet, like a funnel, to where people would come and they would give their money. Well, they had coins, metal coins in those days. And so whenever a person put money in there, you could hear it clank all the way down. And they could give to widows. They could give to orphans. They could give to the temple fund. Just whichever one they decided that they would give. As Jesus is sitting there with His disciples, they're watching as people are coming. And it says that the rich people came and, man, they made a commotion. Because when they dumped in their bags of coins, it made a lot of noise, and everybody would look up and see, man, that person gave a lot of money. There's a lot to that. But then it says that there was a widow, an older woman who came through, and all she had was 2 copper coins. The equate for us today would simply be 2 pennies is all that she had. Would not have made any commotion whatsoever. But it's amazing that in in Mark chapter 12, Jesus says this, calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, truly, I tell you, this poor woman has put more in the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. Is this thing working? No. Is it working like it's supposed to be? Because I feel like it's not.
Hey, what do you know? All right, so Jesus says it's not the people that make all the commotion. It's not the people that give the big amounts of money in the offering. It's this lady who all she has is 2 small coins. She gave more than anybody else because she gave every bit that she had, all that she had to live on. I've got a cousin who runs a ministry in Atlanta, Georgia called Jesus Place. They work with homeless men and women in the part of Atlanta in which they are. And they have those people come and they'll get clothes, they can get food, they can get personal hygiene items. And I love being able to do that. I love being able to do VBS out on the street with kids. But one of my favorite things was on Sundays, they would have a church service. And so homeless men and women would come and then they're just in whatever they have. They don't smell the best, because they can't take showers and things, many of them. But we would come in and my cousin would play the piano. And we would sing hymns, and people would begin to sing. And I'm telling you, man, it was some good singing in that church. And we would have communion. My cousin John, he would preach. But one of the most amazing things to me is that they would take up an offering in this church service. First time I was there, I was thinking, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. You're going to take up an offering with homeless men and women. Why would you do that? I asked my cousin John, why do y'all take an offering? He said, because they need to know that we give. You give out of whatever you have. And it was amazing that as those plates went around, to hear change being thrown in. And by the time it got to us, and we were in the very back, there were a few crumpled up $1 bills. And yet they had an offering that they took up and they gave to God. And I thought, man, what a beautiful testimony that is, that they would give, even though they don't have enough to even have a home, or many times to have clothes, or enough food for the day, and yet out of what they have, they were still willing to give. And what you and I need to understand is generosity. It's not about equal gifts, it's about equal sacrifice. So I think sometimes we get caught up and go, if I was rich, I would do more. If I was rich, I could make a difference. But we got to understand generosity is not equal gifts, it's equal sacrifice. And God looks at our heart. He looks at the sacrifices that we're willing to make. Jesus said a woman giving just 2 pennies gave more than the rich who dumped in many, many coins. So I want us to go back to 2 Corinthians today. We were in chapter 9 last week. I want us to go back to chapter 8. Would you turn there with me? 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And we want to read some of these verses where Paul is going to talk to us about some churches and their habit of giving. And we're going to kind of compare it to us and how we give and how we share. And it's the idea of more sacrifice. You and I be willing to sacrifice for other people. Now we're going to begin 2 Corinthians chapter 8. We're going to begin in the first verse. And we're going to go through these verse by verse for part of it. All right, verse 1. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. All right, we need to understand that Paul, on his missionary journeys, would go to different places where people had not heard the message of Jesus. He would teach it. People would accept Jesus Christ. They'd be baptized. And they would start a church. And so he planted churches all over this area called Macedonia. And so what he's saying to the church in Corinth, because that's who he's writing to, this letter to the Corinthians, he's going to say, I want to tell you about these churches in Macedonia. Verse 2, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. Now, I think this is a pretty amazing verse because it's got some things that don't go together. Because he said these churches were going through a severe trial. Now, we don't know exactly what their trial might have been. Paul doesn't tell us. But in that part of the world, at that time, it easily could have been a famine. And they so relied on crops for everything that they do that if there was a famine, it would be a severe trial for them. It would take away their food. It would take away what they would use to get other things purchased, barter for things that they need. And so a famine could be a severe trial. But not only that, but also that would lead to economic depression. If people don't have food, they're not spending money. If you don't spend money, the economy's not working right. And so they could have been just very, very poor, which is what we expect they were. But even on top of that, it could have been political oppression. You know, whoever the bodies were that came in, the people that took over different lands and areas, they would tax people so much that a lot of times they couldn't make ends meet. You and I, we lose our mind in April because we have to pay taxes. We don't pay near what a lot of other people have to pay, and especially in biblical days. And so all of these things together, he says there was a severe trial. And then he even says they had extreme poverty. Okay, poverty means you really don't have what you need to have to survive. Extreme poverty means you don't have anything that you need to be able to survive. So they're under a severe trial, experiencing extreme poverty, but what's sandwiched right there in the middle of it? Overflowing joy. Does that make sense to anybody? Okay, through severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. They knew they were poor. They knew they didn't have what they needed to make it through the day, and yet they just got so happy. And it just expressed itself in their rich generosity. Let's keep going. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able and beyond their ability. I love that. They gave as much as they could, but then they gave more. In other words, they were willing to do without so that others could have what they needed. And I don't think this means they did without once. I think that means maybe they just put their needs on hold and said, you know what, I was able to eat today already. So the money I was going to use to buy bread, I will give so that somebody else can have their needs met. They gave beyond their ability. And maybe, just maybe, they trusted God who said, I will bless you abundantly. So that in all times, at all occasions, you're going to be able to give and share. And so they believed that, and they gave not only at their ability, but they went above their own ability. At the end of verse 3, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. I love that verse. They pleaded. And that idea of pleaded, what I picture is a kid in the weeks leading up to Christmas. Please, Mom and Daddy, I've got to have a whatever it is. When I was a kid, it was like a toy gun or a basketball. Now it's computers and phones and switches and not the kind you whoop kids with. It's games and all those kind of things. Man, please, I've got to have this. And he said that's what the churches were doing. The churches in Macedonia were coming to Paul going, please, oh, please let us give. It is a privilege for us to be able to give and to be able to share with other people. Man, what a beautiful story of a group of churches, right? Let me ask you this. When was the last time you found one of our elders and you begged them to give? When's the last time you found Andrew or Gary and you said, hey, listen, I got money burning a hole in my pocket. I need to give it to somebody. Steve, Shirley, you know somebody. Please let me give because it's a privilege to be able to give. But that's this church. And remember, this is not a rich church. This is the severe trial, extreme poverty church. But they begged and they pleaded, let us give. Do you consider it a privilege to give? When you put your tithes and offerings in, you go, man, such a privilege to be able to do this. Because God's going to take what I give and He's going to put it together with what everybody else gives, and He's going to bless it, and people are going to be impacted in the name of Jesus. Do we consider it a privilege to give? Would our giving change if the economy tanked? Would we keep on giving? See, that's more sacrifice. That's what these people were willing to do. Verse 5, and they exceeded our expectations. I love it. Maybe Paul and some of the other guys got together and went, you know what, I don't know, I think we'll get $100. If they give $100, that'd be amazing. And they take it up as $300. Like, wow! They went over the top of what we thought that they would give. I think it's pretty interesting. How do they do that? How do they have the ability to give? What was the process? He says at the end of verse 5, they gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God also to us. See, here's the way that they did it. Here's the process that they worked under. Those churches, the people that made up their churches, they gave themselves first to God. They said, God, I do not belong to me anymore. I belong to you. If I belong to you, everything that I have belongs to you. And so I'm giving you and everything that I have. They gave themselves first to God. And then they were able to give to Paul so that he could share with other churches that were struggling, apparently worse than the Macedonian churches, or at least they thought that. And so they wanted to give. So if you and I want to know how to have more sacrifice, how to be able to give more, then we first of all give ourselves to God. If we do that, He's going to take care of everything else. If we think like God, we're going to see people in our community differently. We're going to see people in our world differently. And we're going to beg and we're going to plead, God, give me opportunities to give and to share. I've got an abundance. I want to give out of that, but I'll give out of whatever I have. If I need to do without so that somebody else can have things that they need, God, I'm willing to do that. It would be a privilege for me to do that. You see, generosity does not equal gifts. It's equal sacrifice. You may not be able to give as much as the person next to you, but God doesn't look at the amount of the gift. He looks at the amount of the sacrifice. That's why that woman in the temple gave more than everybody else, and she gave 2 pennies. Why? Because she gave everything that she had. Man, she was trusting God. God, you're going to take care of me. You're going to have to do it because I got nothing. No money to take care of myself. More sacrifice. More generosity. That's what I believe Paul is calling us to in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 9. Now let's keep reading. Let's pick it up in verse 6. So we urged Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. Titus was going to be carrying offerings to Paul and them, meeting up with them so that the money could go where it needed to be. And he says, we want Titus to finish what you started. Okay, you wanted to help, you started giving, so you make sure that you continue to give. Verse 7, but since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in love we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in the grace of giving. Now, I want us to go back because this is a pretty interesting verse to me. He says, you as a church, okay, Corinthian church, you excel in everything. He says you excel in faith. So let me ask you, Rich Acres, do you excel in faith? Can people see Jesus in you? The way you live, the way you drive, the way you Black Friday shop, the way you work, the way you go to school. Can people see Jesus in you? That's excelling in your faith to where it's not just something you do on Sunday, you do it every day of the week. And then he says, speech. They excelled in speech. How about you? Can people see Jesus in the things that you say? To the slowest cashier on the planet who happens to work at Walmart every time you go shopping. Can people hear Jesus in the things that you say to and about your boss or your employees? Teenagers, can people hear Jesus in your speech when you talk about your parents, when you're not with them? Parents, when you talk about your children? Do people see Jesus in you? He said, man, these churches, Corinthian churches, they excelled in that. How about Rich Acres? He said, do you excel in knowledge? He would ask us. I believe that out of the group of people we have here this morning, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of knowledge. Because we've been coming to church, we've been studying God's Word, we've been hearing lessons and sermons, and so we've got the knowledge, but do we share it with people around us? Do we excel in giving them knowledge that tells them that God loves them so much He allowed Jesus to die for them? So that they can have a relationship with God and one day experience an eternity in heaven? Do we excel in sharing our knowledge with people? We should. Then he says, do you excel in your earnestness? Okay, consistency. Are you living out what you say you believe? Does your walk match your talk? You earnestly pray for people and give to people. And the last thing he says, and I don't think he says it last for no reason, he says, excel in love. You know, I think sometimes we believe that people need things to have worth. And we see people on the side of the road with a sign that says, we'll work for food, hungry, need clothes, whatever. And we think the food and the clothes is what they need. It is right now temporarily. But what they really may need is somebody to love them. Somebody to say, you know what? God loves you. I love you. Maybe I can help you meet those needs, but you need to know that there are people who love you. Because there are people in our world that think that they're unlovable because they've been told that by their parents or their grandparents, or maybe a spouse or a sibling. And people have been told, you're not lovable. God can't love you, maybe other people, but not you. And they need to know that. So you and I need to excel in showing love to people. Not just talk about it, but show it. He says, excel. You're already excelling in all of those things. So now excel in the grace of giving. He says they go hand in hand. Listen, I don't want you to think that more generosity and more sacrifice, that we're only talking about money. That's not the only thing that I'm talking about. Should we give of our money? Should we sacrifice? Absolutely. But we give out of all the ways that God has blessed us. Maybe you just need to share some time. Maybe you need to share some of the resources that you have. And see, it's not that it's an equal gift, but it's an equal sacrifice. Maybe you can only sacrifice an hour, and somebody else will sacrifice a week and go on a missions trip. But if you bring that sacrifice with a willing heart, then God's going to see that, and He's going to accept it. It's us sacrificing and giving on people's behalf. Let's keep it going. He says, I'm not commanding you, this is verse 8, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. You realize that you cannot demand generosity and sacrifice? You cannot demand that a person be generous. You cannot demand that your children sacrifice. Now, you can tell them to share their toy. And like I told you last week, go work in the nursery and they'll go, mine. That's my toy. And if you take it away from one child and give it to another child, they might cry and get upset. You cannot demand that somebody sacrifices or somebody is generous. So Paul says, I can't demand it of you, but I'm just going to test and see. I'm going to see if your love for other people, how it compares to other people. How it compares to other churches. And I wonder what Paul would say to us. What would he say to Rich Acres Christian Church if he began to compare us to other churches in our community and in our state and in our world? I believe we would say we're doing a whole lot right. I would say together as a church, we are very generous. We share financially. We share time with people. But how do we compare? Well, not we. How do you compare? See, it's easy. Listen to me. It's easy to ride the wave of generosity that is generated by this church and not give a dime. Okay, it's easy for you and I to ride the wave of generosity that is serving in our community without ever lifting a finger. So the question to me is not, is Rich Acres generous? Because to me that's a resounding yes. The question is not, is Rich Acres willing to serve our community and do for people who can't do for themselves? Absolutely, yes. The question is, how about you? Personally. If Paul compared you to people around you, do you see that love, that earnestness, and that sacrifice? Verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich. Some of you are marking that verse right now. You're like, yes, this says I'm going to be rich. That's why Jesus came. Jesus came so that I could be rich. For some of you, yeah. God's going to bless some people financially. They're going to be rich. Why? A lot of them, I believe, because they give, they share, they just keep giving. And maybe that's in your future. But what we got to realize is Jesus understand when he came on a celebration we call Christmas. He brought with him his life to die for us so that we can have our relationship with God restored, so that we can have our sins forgiven, and we can spend eternity with him in heaven. There's nothing greater than those riches. And Jesus came, left heaven, left worship, left the ability to do anything so that he could come and be a person and die for you. That's why Jesus came. Verse 10. And here's my judgment about what is best for you in this matter. Last year you were the first not only to give but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it according to your means. In other words, Paul says you need to do what you said you're going to do. If you got an angel tree ornament, buy a gift. Don't stick it under your car seat and forget about it, because somebody else is going to have to go out and buy one for you. If you make a commitment to some kind of, maybe a ministry where you're going to support a child or anything like that, you fulfill your commitment. You do what you said you were going to do. That's what he's urging the church in Corinth to do, and that's what I believe he would urge you and I to do. When you say you're going to do something, be men and women of your word. When you say you're going to give, give. And I love this last verse, verse 12. For if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. So that ties into that giving with a cheerful heart, not giving reluctantly or compulsively, but giving not only out of your abundance, but giving beyond maybe your own means. It's the idea. If the willingness is there, God's going to accept your gift. It doesn't matter whether it's $2,000 or 2 pennies. If you give with the right attitude, God says, thank you. I heard one man say, if you're not going to give with a good attitude, you might as well keep it, because God don't want it. But if the willingness is there, whatever you give is going to be accepted by God. See, generosity is not equal gifts. It's equal sacrifice. You may not be able to give as much. You may not be able to serve as much. You may not be able to go as much. But you don't compare it to other people. You compare it to sacrifice. Am I sacrificing so that someone else can have what they need? See, we talk a lot about God giving us what we want, need, and a lot of times He gives us what we want. But what if God doesn't meet your needs? Does that mean you don't give? Not according to this. According to Paul and the churches in Macedonia, the churches in Corinth, you give even if you're in need. That's why the church in Atlanta, for homeless men and women, they take up an offering because you give even when you're in need. Because God says, I will bless you abundantly, so that in all times, in all situations, you will be able to be generous, to give, and to share. So have you ever thought about giving up something you need for someone who needs something more? It's all right to take out of our excess, out of our savings, out of some unexpected money. That's one thing. But to give when I could really use that. Man, I could use that to buy food. I could use that to pay rent. I could use that to pay a credit card. I could use that to pay my electric bill. But instead, I'm going to give it to somebody else who needs more. Wow. Or to say, you know what? I need to spend time with my family. I need to spend more time at work. I need to spend time around the house catching up on things. But instead of that, I'm going to give my time that I don't feel like I have so that somebody else can be blessed. So that somebody else can know Jesus. See, Jesus came and sacrificed Himself so that we had a way to God. Jesus came and sacrificed Himself so that others could live. Would you ever sacrifice yourself for somebody else? There's 3 people I know of I would for sure. Man, woman, or man. No question. If I had to die for them to live, heartbeat. But how about somebody else? How about you? If it was just somebody you kind of knew, not real well, but you knew them, would you be willing to sacrifice your life? Cynthia Highland tumbled through the air with more than 120 miles an hour. She couldn't get herself into the proper position. She couldn't find her parachute ripcord. She couldn't tell how close she was to the ground. Highland, she was a skydiving student who was flanked by 2 instructors, Robert and Jim. At first, the jump went according to plan. Robert and Jim were on either side of Highland holding handles on her jumpsuit. They got into the proper position, facing the ground, back arched upward. Highland practicing grabbing her ripcord. But she couldn't find it. She began to flip. She said, we suddenly became unstable and we were all on our backs looking up at the sky. I couldn't see my altimeter and I was terrified. As we continued down, I was trying to get into a proper stance to turn us over, and I think we did roll back over, although we were banging into each other. The 3 tipped over and went into a dive. Highland said the next thing she knew, her parachute deployed. She learned later that one of the instructors, Robert, pulled the cord for her. The skydiving veteran had stayed with her, but he never had a chance to pull his own cord. Cynthia told investigators that Robert, known to his friends as Bobo, died because he took the time to ensure her survival. I'm sure that Bobo stuck with me until I was safely under a canopy before thinking of his own safety, she told investigators. And unfortunately, he didn't have sufficient altitude to deploy his parachute. He saved my life. Can you imagine being willing to lose your life so that someone else can live? When you think that way, I think giving money seems to not seem like much, right? I think giving time to serve our foster care family dinner, to help Christmas cheer, make food boxes to give out to families, to go out into our community and do for other people, to me it doesn't seem like that much. There's people willing to sacrifice their life. That's what Jesus did. He's our example of how we're supposed to live. Family, we live in a society and a culture that says more. Get more and more and more, because with more comes happiness. With more comes fulfillment. But if you live long enough, you realize that's not the case. Paul calls us to excel in the grace of giving. Not only giving of our things, but giving of our time, our talents. The story of Jesus with people around us. This series has been all about getting you to be more like Jesus, to be more generous. Remember, generosity is not equal gifts. It's equal sacrifice. Are you willing to sacrifice for Jesus today? Bow your heads in this prayer. God, I thank you that you sacrificed your own Son to give us hope in the future. You allowed your Son to be born as a baby, to grow up and to minister, to show us how much you love us. Father, it was such a generous gift, and I pray that we never take it for granted. Now, Father, I pray that we would excel in the grace of giving. Giving of our money, giving of our time, of ourselves, to give people who are in need what they need. And to give people an opportunity to learn the message of Jesus Christ. Bless us, Father, as we go into this time of decision. May we look at our own hearts. May you speak to us.